Hello, everybody. This stream is one where I went into the room of James Apperson, who did a after show for Derek from Mythbusters, who is a really interesting guy and does some great stuff. We got into a really interesting conversation where mostly I just played sort of devil's advocate and almost brought up some of the problems with what he was saying and the problems with hard sort of naturalism and a few of these different things. I don't know if it has a huge amount of merit, but it was an interesting conversation. We're of course joined by the lovely Bree from Hive Science, and it was a really nice conversation. Not that long, so I thought I'd throw it up for your enjoyment. Let's rumble.
Man, today's a special night for me. Like two all
Hey,
stars coming on stream. Hi, Mark.
hey, how you doing, James? I just thought I'd drop in and I didn't see the original with IP. I'd love to see it, but yeah, I was just interested in what you were talking about, mate. So I thought I'd drop in and chat. I think maybe Gur should drop in and chat as well. I think we
He's
should.
always welcome. He knows. Yeah.
Oh yeah,
The
Gur's
links.
welcome
The,
everywhere.
the links out there. The links out there.
Yeah.
So, I don't know how much of it you caught. Were you here when Derek was talking?
No, I wasn't. I'm sorry. I would have liked to hear him talk because Myth Vision is a really good show, and um,
Yeah.
yeah, the guy he was talking to, inspiring philosophy, isn't it? Inspiring philosophy,
So it was Testify and on Testify's channel, but
right?
Inspiring Philosophy was there, and then another guy who I'm not familiar with was there, but then he wasn't
Mm,
feeling well and had to leave. And they were all
yeah.
believers, as I understood it, and it was just against Derek. Because
Yes.
they were originally going to just discuss Derek's war video without Derek there, and Derek's like, "Hey, why not have me on to discuss it?" And then they thought that
Sure.
was a good idea,
Yeah.
and then they had him on.
Mm,
So I think it ended up being a lot better of a show that way because I think when Derek if Derek hadn't been present, I think that might have been a little bit less fair, a little bit more aggressive, and so I'm
right.
glad and Derek's side wouldn't have been heard. So I'm so glad that he was in there for that.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, and Derek's, he's amazing. He does awesome stuff.
He is.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, but you were talking about
Derek's
miracles and why that doesn't point to a god kind of thing.
yeah.
Um, so I'm not sure I understand your argument. I think I get it. Is it sort of the attribution of these? Like for a start, you have a problem of defining what a miracle is.
Sure. So I
Because
tried to kind of bake that into my statement a little bit, but
okay,
it's there's room for semantic, disambiguation here. There's room for saying, well, let's define it this way or let's define it that way. And that is another problem that I think should be the religious people's problem, not mine. But
well, yeah, yeah,
I'm trying to work with what they give me, and it seems like basically a miracle is an exception to physics caused by an outside force that causes a special event to happen in our world that wouldn't have otherwise happened, and which is considered beneficial to the people who
yeah,
are impacted or affected some way by the event. And so I'm trying to capture the essence of it and now
right,
with when Christians propose the idea, they are attaching the idea of a God doing a thing, right? That's spectacular and that impressive. But I feel like they can't logically connect those two. They just have to decide to connect those two ideas because in theory, a non-god entity, whatever the hell a god is, I'm not even clear on that, but
yeah,
whatever a god is, a non-god entity would be whatever that's not, could do something similar. And this is one of the things I love about sci-fi TV series is because they take a lot of these issues, these ideas and these problems, and they bake them into fantasy narratives to give everyone, including religious people, an opportunity to examine these issues with their defenses down, where their religion is not on the line, it's not being gambled with, it's not being challenged directly. And so even religious viewers can say, wow, that episode of Star Trek raised a lot of
What
good
does
points
God need
about
with
how
a
people,
starship? Yeah.
yeah, like what does God do
Right.
with the starship? Or there was another one from Star Trek: The Next Generation, where there was this lady that had advanced technology and convinced a population that she was the fulfillment of some ancient prophecies they had. So she
Hmm.
caused earthquakes and did other things to kind of right when these events are supposed to happen, and convinced them that she was the rightful heir to their planet because she was this god being with god powers that did these god things for the god-fearing people.
Sure.
And through the course of the episode, Picard points out that, look, this is just super advanced technology being used by somebody that's very opportunistic, who's posing as somebody more grand and more trustworthy than she is. And it took a lot of convincing, but eventually convinced them of it. So here in the real world, I find the idea of a super advanced alien civilization with advanced technology as the
More
potential
probable.
cause of special event more probable
Hmm. More
than
probable, right.
than
But I
yeah.
think there was that quote that says that sort of any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Like
Yes.
if you can't wrap your head around it, it will look like magic to you, just as if you took,
Hmm.
a lighter to the tribes of, ages ago in sort of Paleolithic era. It would look like you were doing magic, but we know that's a very simple explanation. But
Right.
I think it's more probable as well. But you know, it depends on what we're talking about. Whether we're talking about what people that we encounter call a miracle, and so you're going for sort of a what a metaphysical miracle would be. Like if one actually existed, it would sort of be a circumventing of natural law in a way that
Right. So
couldn't possibly happen with any amount of technology or any amount of human knowledge or sort of it's
well,
outside the realm of materialistic beings.
right. So I'm trying to define miracle according to their intention of what it means to them
Right, right.
by extrapolating from the context in which they use the word.
Yes.
And then I'm separating that kind of phenomenon from the claim that a god being is doing the thing. So I'm separating the event as
Mm,
described from the alleged causer of the event, and so that we can look at them separately. Now, if they can make a good argument for how these have to be fused into one phenomenon, I'm listening, but I've certainly never heard them make such an argument. So, without them making an argument, let alone a convincing one, I treat them as separate, and then we consider them, individually. And if we can come up with a good reason to think
mm,
miracles happen, then how are they going? Can they help me build the bridge to? Therefore, a god did it.
right.
Um, and I and I just don't think that they can.
Well, the question is also how do you tell that the miracle came from a god, much less your god? Um,
Right.
the fact that they sort of say, "Hey, I prayed for something, and then this miracle occurred." The problem with that chain of effect is that they pray for sort of on a regular basis for almost everything. So how do we then make the causal link? If you do that for everything, how do you then make that causal link to it was the prayer to your God that did that? I think that requires a leap of faith because there's been plenty of things that you've prayed for that haven't come true.
Mhm.
So if you pray for everything, like if I constantly pray for everything in my life and suddenly I win the lotto, of course I'm going to think that that was the prayer that did it. But you know what I mean? Like there's no causal link there when I pray for
Right.
everything all the time.
Right. I agree 100%. Now they do ask that we give them the benefit of the doubt, that we take that leap of faith with them to say that, you know, this
Hmm.
testimony counts as evidence, or that kind of
Right, right.
phenomenon, counts as evidence. But one thing that I found to be an incredibly useful, objectively useful tool in those discussions is what I call the law of non-hypocrisy. If they're not willing to grant the same standards of evidence for a different religion, then I refuse to grant it for them. And if they are willing to grant that for other religions, now we can talk,
Well,
right? And we'll see
that's a
where that
good point.
conversation goes.
Yeah, and that's something I wanted to say because you brought that up earlier, and it's sort of intellectual consistency, sort of the
Right.
idea that if I'm going to intellectually say, well, I'm going to have a standard of this much for my religion, that it is applied without prejudice across everything, really, sort of so all beliefs kind of thing. But that's, I've found, not the case. It's more a case of, well, I'm going to have my bar down here for my religion, and the bar up here for everything else, including some of the scientific stuff that we have. I
Right.
often joke about, young Earth creationists sort of saying, evolution is a myth. It's just this wild, wacky story. Now, listen to my thing about the talking snake kind of thing. It's like, well,
Right.
where is the intellectual consistency to say, hey, if I require this huge bar for evolution, then I really should require that huge bar for my creationism as well. And I run into
Mhm.
that a lot.
Right. Yeah, so they set the bar, the standard, for their own religion down at the ground. I call it the William Lane Craig level or height, and then they
Right.
set it at the James Randi level for all other religions. And
Right,
I'm like,
exactly. And that baffled me from William Lane Craig. He sort of lower the standards, lower your standards if you can't get there. It seems it was so baffling from him. I'm not sure why he would take that particular tack. Um, and I mean, we all kind of have our axioms and our presuppositions kind of thing, but I think when you're applying it unevenly, there's going to be inherent bias creeping in. If you're a scientist and you're working on something and you say, "Hey, I don't need much evidence to be convinced of this particular hypothesis, but I need all the evidence in the world to be convinced of the other one," there's only one way that's going to go. There's only one outcome that's going to lead to, and that's inherent bias. So
right,
there's a reason why we kind of try to insulate ourselves from that.
right. Now, I've heard them try to explain or justify that, and one of the ways is because they have certain needs that they assume to be baked into the human condition, baked into human psyche, and they assume that that was baked in by a god.
Right.
Certain needs that,
That's tag. Yeah, transcendental argument for God.
yeah, and that they don't see other
Yeah.
religions meeting or meeting as well. And so I'm like, well, okay, but let's understand what it means to be oh, what's that word? Adolescent. When they assume everyone thinks the same way they do. Egocentrism.
Right.
That's what
Right.
that is. That's what that is. It's I feel a way, so certainly everybody feels that way. This whole the law has been written into our hearts kind of a thing.
Yeah,
And
I'm not entirely convinced of that. I'm not. I don't think that's the case that they sort of go, well, everybody has to think like me. I'm
they
not
don't all.
convinced.
I've heard the argument a lot. They don't all think that, but a lot of them
Yeah.
do. I've heard different
Hmm.
versions of it. Some say that everybody believes in a god. You're just in denial. A god wrote
Well,
it into our hearts and wrote it into nature that he
yeah.
exists and everybody sees it.
Well, that's more the presuppositionalists that
Sure.
because they sort of they're the reliability of their knowledge is based upon that it was given to them directly by God, and He gave everybody that knowledge. So that is an article of faith that they just presuppose. And sort of when you say they claim a God is needed, I think you're talking about tag, sort of the idea that morality or even intelligibility at all is dependent on a
Sure.
God. So therefore, it's kind of that sort of a post hoc rationalization. We're all intelligible. If you assume that intelligibility is required by God, we're all intelligible. Therefore, God exists. It's sort of It's sort of putting the conclusion first and then coming up with the means to get there. Um,
Sure.
but
But
I think that that argument's kind of flawed because you do have to sort of presuppose that in the first place. You've got to say, hey, I'm going to presuppose that God is responsible for morality or God is responsible for intelligibility, and then I'm going to work off there. And anybody that doesn't agree with that, you just dismiss, kind of thing. And I've run into these people a fair bit, and um, you know, it's a very weak argument. Like you see philosophers and things, they don't sort of, it's not like they're unaware of the arguments, but it just doesn't contain any merit for them. Like there is no real way to get you there. The other one I hear is that they start with God in their logical justifications, and I've begun to point out that you can't start with God because unless you are God, right? Then you can like because you've only got your own thoughts and your own right your own consciousness to work from. That has to be your starting point. You can't start like I can't start with James Apperson's consciousness because I'm not
right,
James Apperson, right? I can't do
right.
that. I can talk to you and use my own consciousness to accept what you say and make a series of evaluations, but I can't start from somewhere that my consciousness is not occupying. So this idea that we start with a god, I just don't understand it. Like it just
Hmm.
doesn't. Okay, you might try to be say, well, I have an axiom, like my consciousness has a base level of what I believe, and I'm going to presuppose that is true, so it's axiomatic, and then start from there. That's fine. But you can't start from the God. You've got to start from your own thoughts and your own consciousness. Um, but that's what a lot of them do want to do. They say, well, my chain of reasoning is God, and then flow on from there. You can't start there.
No, it certainly isn't impressive to me when they do so. I mean, what am
Right.
I going to do? Hindus can start with many gods, or they can start with Ganesh specifically. And what does that do
Sure.
for me? That doesn't, it doesn't do anything for me.
Right.
And
Right.
this goes back to the whole law of non-hypocrisy thing. If they're not willing to grant an
Mm.
equal weight, the exact same way of reasoning for another religion, then I'm not going to grant it for them.
Right.
This is
Right.
no special privileges here. We're not humoring narcissism and the whole pretense of, I get to operate by different standards than everybody else does.
Mm.
No, you do, and you do at church. You do behind closed doors. You do in your own head. But you don't get to do that at my time. So,
Well,
they got to give me something better than that.
and the question I wanted to raise was, how did you know the miracle was from your God and not another God, or a malicious demon wanting you to believe that magic is real, or sort of, so how do you evaluate that and sort of logically tell that it is in fact your particular God that has caused this? Um,
Right.
there's a million and one sort of hypotheses that you could throw down into there, and
Hmm.
they don't seem to have a way to convincingly test for their particular god. In fact, they don't seem to have a particular way to test for any god at all, which is not our fault. Um, if so this whole thing of, well, let's just allow them that sort of that sort of justification, I think that's in error because um as you say, if you allow it for them, then you've got to allow it for every religion, and then you lead to contradictory results. Either that,
Hmm.
or there's some multiple omnipotent deities running around somehow, which I don't logically get how that could work.
Well, I certainly I agree, but I like the idea of polytheism better than I like monotheism. So watching a Myth Vision recently with Cooney.
So
Um,
right, but polytheism, you mean, just sort of doesn't have the omnipotent kind of label
right.
to it. So
So the way she explains it is monotheism, which does not have its roots in the Hebrew religion, by the way.
mm,
The reason it started and the reason it repeated in other religions was always for one purpose. It was always to consolidate power in order to get your citizens to solidify as a force so you can aim them as a weapon at your rivals. If there's only, and I wrote this in a blog. I almost want to pull it
Mm,
up to quote myself because I'm probably gonna misquote myself if I don't pull it up.
right.
Um, Hold on one second. I'm gonna pull the blog up. Here it is. It's the most recent one that I wrote.
Well,
So
I think
scrolling.
monotheism had its roots in Zoroastrianism. I think was the first monotheistic religion. Like it wasn't.
So she places it at the Egyptian king. Oh, it starts with a K. I can't remember his name now. Like I don't know. Was it 13th or 14th century BC? If
So
Derek
sort
was
of
still
the
here, he could.
pharaoh worship
Um,
kind of thing. The embodiment of the gods as pharaoh.
Right. So I wrote monotheism was always a way to consolidate power and to mobilize society into violence against political rivals. Having only one deity and only one person or class to posture as his appointed voice means having only one voice that gets to be considered authoritative, along with only one promised way, one kingdom to serve, and one way to ensure it. That
Mm,
way there's no dissenting voices, there's no contest, there's no competition. It's just this way, right? Which you can only accomplish if you just have the one God. Because as soon as you start having other gods, or actually polytheism predated monotheism by a long shot.
yeah.
So we always had these different gods, these different ideas about what should be your priorities and your values, what matters most in life. And so if you were the god of war, you had an opinion that was much different than the goddess of love, for example. And
Well, it's
so if
interesting because the
but
Greek city states all just had their one sort of patron deity kind of thing. They kind of, sort of, so Ares was mostly worshipped by the Spartans, while Athens had Athena as their patron deity kind of thing. So they do seem
sure,
like, yeah, that sort of people grouping together would select one out of the pantheon and say, hey, that's our day, that's our guy kind of thing, which
right.
speaks
But
a
if you had a
lot to
king,
that idea. Mm,
right. Yeah, and if you had a kingdom that had all these different ideas about these different gods, and you want to get everybody on the same page with the same kinds of values and same mission statement under one authority, so you could aim them as a weapon at your political rivals, you don't want these different people with these different gods and different ideas about what's important in the world to be arguing about just how on the same page you guys should be about what you should do in the kingdom, what kind of kingdom you want to create, who are and aren't your enemies, how you should deal with enemies. You don't want all these competitions and disagreements amongst people that normally are peaceful enough to say you go worship your god, I'll worship mine. Now you're trying to get them on the same page about issues that their respective gods have opinions about.
mm,
That's going to be a problem. So
yeah, yeah.
monotheism just resolves the problem.
Well, it
Um,
also resolves the problem of where did the miracle come from? Because if you've only got one God, you can't argue about where your miracle came from, I guess.
right, exactly. Great point. Absolutely. So in the meantime, and I don't know if you caught this because I had like just thrown it out there before you were in, but to me, if we just grant the idea of a miracle and then
Mm,
grant the idea of an agent that creates these miraculous events, it's incompatible with the idea that there is a perfectly just entity doing the events, because miracles by description, not my description, the description given by believers, are unjust by nature, because it's the proposition that there is this super entity that's playing favorites at a whim and with really bad priorities that make absolutely no sense in the world, right?
okay, so
So
there's a lot to unpack there, James, because it depends on what your ideas of what just actually means. So,
sure.
um, I know you're probably not sort of making that argument, but I'd avoid a naturalistic fallacy that sort of the natural world is the one that ought to be, that is the best world or the world that should be. Um,
Right.
so So if you are, just to put my creationist cap on, if you sort of say that whatever God does is just, then miracles are just because they are the will of a God kind of thing. That would probably be the argument that you would see, just to sort of play devil's advocate or angel's advocate or God's
Right.
advocate.
So
Um,
there's two facets of that argument. One, the possible implication is might makes right. He's got the power to insist that anything he does is
Sure.
automatically fine.
Machiavellianism.
And
Yeah,
the
sure.
right, and the other argument is that he might even share our idea of justice, but he sees how all the pieces connect in the background, and he has this end result that we'd all approve of if we knew what the end result was. Therefore, he moves this piece and does this miracle, but doesn't do a miracle for somebody else, because there's a chain reaction of events that we won't get to completely witness. The end result is going to be one we all want to happen if we were to know what the end result is. Therefore, he's not necessarily violating our idea of justice to ignore certain people's plights and pay attention to other people's plights. That's the other argument that I've heard for that.
Well, and a good point is that if God needed something to happen, He would have planned it like that instead of doing a miracle. The
Right.
usual explanation of that is the miracles are there to help us believe in a God kind of thing. Um, However, what I've found is these explanations of miracles never definitively lead back to a god. Not like the ones you hear in the Bible kind of thing, like a burning bush speaking to you, or manna dropping from heaven, or any of these miracles that you can say, hey, that definitely was the God doing it kind of thing. Um, so that the miracles that we get now sort of are just improbable events, just things that are highly improbable. And as any statistician would tell you, like improbable events happen all the time. The fact that
Sure.
we're sitting here talking to one another, when if any of our ancestors died, it's so improbable to be impossible, James. But here we are. But
Hmm.
yeah, it's kind of um, so these events, the problem I have with that argument that miracles are there to convince us of God's existence is that God never makes it clear that He's responsible for the miracles that we observe. Um, the stories make it clear, but the ones that people sort of attest to miracles in today's day and age never seem to be that way.
Yep. So yeah, I'm not really sure how they answered all that, but it's. I mean, let me tell you something that happened with me, and this
Yeah,
was
sure,
probably a
different.
this was probably like 20 years ago.
Mm,
And so we had just rented this really big house. I mean, it's really big. It had a bunch of, it had more bedrooms than we needed. It had a long hallway upstairs, all kinds of nooks and crannies and special cubbies and everything else. Like it was big. And why
mm.
we rented such a big house, I don't know. We had a good deal on it. So,
Sure, sure.
we hadn't moved in yet, and I showed up at the house to kind of like survey it again. We'd already rented it,
Yeah.
and try to figure out where the furniture was going to go and who's going to have what room and blah blah blah. So just as I started to enter the house, I got this really creeped out feeling, like I just couldn't shake it. It was like a
Mhm.
haunted kind of feeling, and as I just started walking through the house, I'm like I couldn't shake it. I ran back outside and I felt instantly better. And I'm thinking maybe this is PTSD and maybe I got some kind of thing going on. There's
No,
some
it's a
kind of trigger,
ghost.
and I just didn't
It's haunted.
haunted. So
Did you see
so
any
I'm like,
blood dripping
okay,
down the walls? Did you see any?
no, I
Okay.
didn't. So here's where it gets more interesting. So I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna walk in there and I'm gonna walk toward whatever's making me feel that way. And I'm not gonna stop till I get there, and I'm gonna confront my own feelings, which are not rational. Right? It wasn't about finding a ghost, it was about confronting my irrational feelings
Right,
and
right,
trying to
right.
do some self inventory, and why am I feeling all creeped out about this house? Maybe there's some architecture that reminds me of a movie I saw once or something, who knows? So I'm thinking about it rationally, despite the fact that I've got some irrational emotions going on. So I walk into the house. I walk around the corner. I go up the staircase. I pass two of the bedrooms. I stop at the third. I walk into that room. I turn, and there is a big closet in a like a cubby area. I walk over to the closet. I reach up above the shelf, and this is I didn't go anywhere else. I didn't look anywhere else. I didn't go anywhere else. I didn't even pause the entire time. And I reached up and I reached beyond, well beyond where I could see. I'm a tall guy, but I could not see up there. I felt the
Mhm.
box. And the instant I felt that box, I felt like such a panic. I just wanted to run. I pull it back out, and it's a homemade Ouija board. And I just, this chill went down my spine, like, no, this shit's not real. And I look in there and it had like human hair wrapped around this like bone carved Ouija thing, and the whole thing was just really creepy. It was not like a Milton or a Hasbro, like
Right,
store
right,
bought
right.
Ouija board. And I took it outside. I threw it in the next door neighbor's trash, not my own. And then the moment I walked back onto the property, I felt fine and never felt creeped out since. And not just that I felt creeped, but that I walked through complicated path in a house without looking in any room that I passed,
Hmm.
in a house I hadn't had a chance to thoroughly look in, yet, and that I walked immediately without hesitation to exactly where that was at, and reached into a space that I could not visually see, and that's immediately what I found. Now, if you tell this to somebody who believes in the occult, they're going to take it as proof that the occult is real. I
Right.
can't explain it, but I still don't believe in the supernatural. There's a physical
Hmm.
explanation for it. And I've heard of people also that have like premonitions, for example. So I proposed a non-supernatural definition or explanation for a possible explanation, not a certain explanation, a possible explanation for premonitions that actually come true. I'm like, what if B theory of time is correct? It's block time, right? And so what if the progression that we experience as time isn't necessarily true objectively, point A to point B. We just experience it that way.
Right.
And what if the energy that plays these events is some kind of gravimetric wave that plays like a needle on a record, and every event that happens and every sound and every action is just the grooves being played, and we experience that as events in time. And so what if, while we're experiencing this moment in the block, some future moment that already exists in the block, we just happen to not be there, we're here, right? A future me or a future you is over in this other block, in place in the block. And what if sometimes there's an arc of energy that transfers between the two, physical energy? What if there's an echo, or what if it's been replayed so many times that we have an accumulative kind of a ghost of a memory that registers inside of us as an intuition, right? Physical causes for premonition that have nothing to do with the supernatural. And so, what
Sure.
if there was a physical explanation, not necessarily blind luck, but a physical explanation to that event that I have with that Ouija board in that house? So, supernatural to me is a nonsense word. It doesn't mean
Sure.
anything. And
Um,
and so, good.
yeah, a couple of thoughts. It's a pity you didn't keep the Ouija board so you couldn't replicate the experiment. Because that would have been good. If
I
you could do it like
I
10 times out of 10, that would be some really good
I
data to
wish that I
have.
had. I wish that I had. Yep,
Right, right,
definitely.
right, right. Secondly, how do you tell it wasn't a massive coincidence? Like
It
people
might have
keep
been.
things above, things. Um, in this one case where you decided to check, it happened to, have to be there. Because I've had
Sure.
creeped out feelings about things before, and I've not found anything. I've just wandered around a bit and not been led to anything. Have you had creeped out feelings before?
No, not like that.
Okay,
No, it was not. No. So I just don't know. You know, there's so many possible explanations, but my point is that
right.
even though I've experienced rare moments in my life that most people would
Hmm.
interpret as supernatural, I don't jump to that conclusion. The same as I wouldn't if some miraculous event that worked in my favor happened, right? I would just say, "Wow, there's a physical explanation for this. I just don't know what it is." Right?
Well,
And it could be coincidence.
it depends on how you're using supernatural, because if it's just anything outside our knowledge, well, then it's supernatural. Like outside our knowledge of the natural world, then it's supernatural. But that means that supernatural is just what we don't understand. So it depends
Well,
on
by that
how you're using
definition,
that word.
sure. By that definition, sure.
If you're sort of talking that supernatural is outside any laws, natural laws of physics or natural laws of the universe, um, okay, well, I don't. Then you don't think it's supernatural. You think that there's a natural explanation, just something that we're unaware of. Um,
Right.
and things like intuitions and stuff can be um, eerily reliable at sometimes, the way that we can sort of subconsciously come to answers that we never would have come up just sort of rationalizing about it. but they're generally unreliable, and sort of studies have sort of documented this pretty well, that they can make intuitive leaps can be amazing at times, but at other times they're just, they'll lead you down the wrong path. I
Right.
mean, I don't know what to make of that story. That's odd. It could just be one of those coincidences, you know.
Yep.
I can
It could
point
be.
out some insane coincidences. I think that what was it? Some girl wrote her name on a balloon and let the balloon go, and it came down in a yard of another girl elsewhere. This was in England, elsewhere in the country, that has exactly the same name
Exactly the
as
same
her.
name. Yep. I've
Yeah,
heard that.
and it was just a sheer coincidence kind of thing. Like, it just, you'd say, oh, there must be some divine providence in that. Nope, just an amazing coincidence. And sort of,
Sure.
when you look at these things, if enough events happen, these outrageous coincidences will occur. Like I said, like the chances of us talking to one another right now is so improbable to be impossible. Like it's not really possible at all that we're talking yet. Here we sit and here we are. Um, so yeah, I mean, it may have been. It may be something that we're unaware of, that there is a transfer of energy, sort of thing. But um, I think it's best to go with that we don't know, because we don't know what has caused it. We don't know,
Right.
and yeah, it's just, if you could replicate that, that would be, so helpful, because then you could say, hey, there is something. It's not just coincidence. There definitely is something going on.
Right.
Um,
Now, if I wish I had, and if I
yeah.
had, and let's say and then we ran the test, and I duplicated it every time enough to
Mm.
even impress the late James Randi,
Right,
I
right,
still
right.
wouldn't. I still wouldn't say it's supernatural, because to me the word is nonsense. Because either there's some kind of energy existing in real time and space doing some kind of thing, or there's not. And if there's not, then there's nothing to talk about. And if there is, then that's physics by some definition, even if it's different physics than ones we normally have to contend with. So it just doesn't mean anything to me. I mean, I would find it fascinating. I'd be like, man, I hope science figures this out. But I wouldn't start getting religious over it, even if we duplicated it. So,
Yeah, yeah.
you
No,
know,
I wouldn't see that as religious, but I refuse. I won't eliminate the supernatural. I gather that you're sort of take a sort of strong naturalist stance, or
well,
materialist
because
stance.
I don't see what the option. I don't see that there's another option. Once typically when a religious person talks about the supernatural, they're
Yeah.
not just saying something we can't explain. They're talking about something that doesn't consist of any substance, isn't any kind of energy doing a thing in our
Right.
time and
Right.
space, right? And I'm like, then you're literally describing literally nothing, and literally nothing doing literally something doesn't make any sense as a concept. Supernatural is like a box that they've got an idea inside of. And they're like, oh, yeah, well, you believe in natural things, but I've got an alternative. It's in this box here, this labeled supernatural. And I'm like, really? What's in the box? What is supernatural? And they're like, I can't open the box. I can't tell you what's in it. Can't describe it. Can't tell you anything about what the supernatural is. But man, this is a competition. This is a competing idea that's not, naturalism. I'm like, well, as soon as you know what it is, then we can
Yeah.
discuss it. Until then, you
Yeah.
don't have anything to offer this discussion at all.
So don't get me
So,
wrong. I don't believe in anything supernatural. I don't necessarily eliminate it as possible, though. Like, I like, don't get me wrong. I believe that nothing supernatural exists, because um the entire premise is that I only believe in things that have actually been demonstrated to be true, or else you start getting into trouble with, things that are not
sure.
necessarily true. But I wouldn't go so far to say that it is impossible that something supernatural exists. I wouldn't go that far. I certainly don't believe it. I at the moment, the with all the evidence that's been presented to me, only the natural world exists. That's what I believe, and
Right.
that's what I know to be true. But there's a
Yeah.
big difference between sort of thinking that the supernatural is not real, and thinking the supernatural is sort of impossible kind of thing. I think there's a
So
huge difference there.
I'm more in the camp of some instead of the word supernatural, let's go with just make up a word that's absolutely ridiculous, like farfignoid, right? My god is farfignoid. I'm like, what the hell is that? They're like, I don't know, but he's that thing. And I'm like, you don't know what it is, but you're telling me he's the thing. And they're like, yep. And I'm like, great, thanks. It's nothing, right? It's
Right,
not a
right.
concept. It's just a word. It's a placeholder. It's a wild card where there would be a concept if they had one. And I'm like, then why are you here bothering me with it if you don't have a concept to propose yet? Supernatural isn't wrong, it's not a concept. It's a placeholder for a concept which they do not possess. Therefore, it merits no consideration because there's nothing to consider. There's just nothing. Now, if they described supernatural as some kind of energy doing some kind of thing, I'd be like, guess what? That's physics. Even if it's different physics than the ones that normally permeate our universe, that our universe consists and subsists of, it's physics by definition. It's just a different kind of physics.
Yeah, but
Or it's
James,
some
I can entertain the concept without actually like acknowledging it, even its possibility. Like I can entertain the concept of magic. That's not hard to do. Like just say that the
sure,
magical tricks that copper whatever field is doing or whatever, or these magicians are doing. Like if that wasn't the trickery that it was, right? And it was
right?
actually done without the trickery, then we'd describe that as magic. It doesn't, the fact that I can't describe exactly what it is, I can still entertain the concept in my mind. I think, um,
Sure.
like I totally get what you're saying because usually supernatural is defined by what it isn't, like, and that's kind of useless because
Mhm.
um, there can be like a zillion things that you can come up with that isn't natural laws kind of thing, and I get what you're saying, but I can still entertain that concept in my head. But I totally get where you're coming from. Like, it's such a nebulous concept, like supernatural, because are werewolves supernatural? Apparently so. You know, are goblins supernatural? That's up in the air. Who knows? It's kind of what makes something supernatural and sort of not other things. Because it doesn't seem to be material things doesn't seem to stop it being supernatural, right? Like a vampire is supernatural, right? So um, and that's why I sort of led it back to anything not explained by science or by our natural laws. And
Mhm.
that sounds like I don't remember the word you said, but the Flavengarten that you said
Right,
earlier,
sure.
right? That's just it's something that can't be explained by natural laws, but that comes with a problem that nothing is really outside of the natural laws, just outside of our understanding. And then comes the
Sure.
question of how do you tell if something is truly outside of our natural laws, or we just don't know the natural laws for it, because something
Sure.
may very well be, we may see a light in the sky and it, does all these things and, sends down a burning bush to talk to us. That may be completely natural. And we get back to the, God was an astronaut kind of thing, the, what does God need with a spaceship kind of thing, that you could, if
Mhm.
you had sufficient technology for it, you could do something and we might think it's supernatural. How do we tell if that is in fact supernatural if our level of understanding stops before it reaches it?
Right. Yeah, and I'll grant that my ability my knowledge set is very limited. My ability to grasp things that
Hmm.
are possible is very limited. And if they say that they've got something going on that's outside of that reach, then I'm like, great, if it's outside of my reach, it's outside of your reach too. And if it's outside of your reach too,
Right.
you can't testify to it. You can't account for it, you can't verify it, you can't
Yeah.
testify to it with any honesty, you know, and we're just stuck with that. Oh well, make peace with it, right? Because that's all we can do.
Well, it
So
becomes it
you know,
becomes sort of axiomatic that it does exist. It becomes sort of just based upon a presupposition that it is in fact a supernatural thing. Um,
yeah,
but yeah, the point is, how do you possibly demonstrate with our human understanding that it's beyond human understanding? It's not really possible. But I think that sort of saying that the supernatural definitely does not exist is taking on a burden that you don't have to take on.
Right. Yeah, I don't say supernatural doesn't exist. I don't say that it's wrong either. I simply say it's not a concept. It's not even
Okay.
a rational it's not a rational endeavor to consider something that isn't a concept, because you can't consider something that isn't a concept. So they should shut up about it. That's my position. They just,
Well, I
give me
just
something.
I don't see it as not a concept. That's the thing. It still is a concept. It may be a irrational, illogical concept. Like you can have the concept of a married bachelor. It's completely impossible, right? Logically, that is impossible. But you can still hold it in your head as a concept. Like I think the problem here, James, is that you think that a concept has to be logical and sort of at least basically logical in structure, and it doesn't. A concept can be
Well, sure,
completely like paradoxical,
sure. I understand the concept of marriage. I understand the concept of bachelor,
right?
right? But supernatural doesn't propose anything.
Okay.
It's just saying you're wrong, and they tried to define it by what it isn't. Well, that's just not helpful. Like you said earlier, that's not helpful. We can't do anything with that.
Yeah,
And
but it's
enough.
more it's more like I understand that the universe has certain natural laws that um, are believed and rightly so. I believe them to be sort of universals and sort of um, yeah, they're universals kind of thing that operates under certain conditions. Um, I think that supernatural would be anything that violates those laws, um,
Sure,
kind of
but
thing. But you're right, I'm defining it by what it isn't and not what it is.
sure.
Um,
Go ahead.
no, that's fine. Go.
So recently, I watched. Again, I followed various science channels. They were talking about how there's some events in the universe that we have observed that if it turns out that we're correctly observing them, time flows in the opposite direction. That being the only possible explanation for how things are happening in those parts of the universe, the observable universe. And they haven't. They're not sure of it yet, but they're like, man, sure seems that way, right?
Okay.
And I allow for that. I allow for my knowledge set is severely less than
Yeah.
what knowledge is possible. My ability to grasp things, my perception of time, my perception of space, all of that could be just so underinformed that it's tragic. That's all entirely
But
possible
but
and
but
probable.
you're aware that sort of ontologically, in a metaphysical sense, that not everything is possible, right?
Sure.
Right. So let's forget about epistemology and what we know, because what I'm talking about is that sort of ontologically, like so in actual fact, there's going to be things in the universe or a set of laws in the universe that sort of will be consistent and universal at all times.
Okay.
Okay, so even though I may know only 1% of that, less than 1%. What am I talking about? Like zero point zero zero
Right.
zero 0.0001% of those stuff, right? But I
Sure.
think that they're sort of saying, well, the supernatural, even though I'm not aware of those laws, the supernatural violates those intrinsic laws of the universe, which would otherwise be unviolatable and universal through
Okay.
whatever means.
Right. So they know that God exists because of the laws that are an expression of his nature. And yet they also know that God exists because he violates his own nature by violating his own laws.
Yeah.
That's a tremendous amount of contradiction for us to just like smile at and pretend like we don't have a problem with it.
Oh yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah. And if
so
God is, and this is the problem with an omnipotent, omniscient God, is that if God wanted the laws to be violated, he could have just designed a universe where that happened. Like he didn't have to design a universe when he stepped in, and that's usually where you get the thing of, well, God's making these exceptions to let us know that he exists. The problem there is none of the exceptions you can, I'm sort of arguing that, hey, I can't rule out the supernatural, but none of these exceptions as they're described leads back to a God. Certainly
Sure.
none that we observe today. You could possibly make a case for the ones in the Bible, but I don't see why we would believe the Bible on anything.
Yeah, I certainly haven't heard a good convincing reason why we should yet. And here's the thing, and
Sure.
this is another thing I want to say about miracles. Even if we grant it all, like just for the sake of argument,
Hmm.
um, eh, non-resistant non-belief exists. There are even, for example, even if
What do you mean
they're
by that?
fringe.
Non-resistant non-belief.
So there's this proposition that's popular among fundamentalist Christians
Right.
that the reason or the justification for God judging everybody for not believing is that the only possible way you could not believe as an adult is if you actually resisted belief. If you've actually chosen to rebel against the God that you intuitively
Right.
know exists.
Yes, gotcha. Yep.
So my point is, look, if we get all these historians, and we can
Hmm.
then talk about science in the same way. If we get all these historians that are saying, you know what, Bible's getting an awful lot wrong, like an awful lot wrong, but then we have some fringe historians on the Christian side of it saying, no, Bible's got it all right, right?
Hmm.
Then and the Christians can say, well, my minority of scientists, they've got it, they're or historians in this case, they've got it right. Bible's 100% verified. But my point would be the very fact that there can be leaders in the historical fields that are qualified to speak on this that say no, Bible's getting an impressive amount of things wrong. Even if the leaders and even if the consensus are mistaken and Bibles are 100% correct, just as a hypothetical. Oh, hey
Hmm.
there, Bree. Hold on one second. Even if that's the case, how I'm sorry. Go ahead, Bree. Hi.
Oh, I was just say hi. That's
Hi,
all.
Bree.
Okay.
Say hello, hello. I finished my food, so I said I'm gonna come in, and here I am. I didn't hear what's been said for the last 10 minutes though, because I muted the YouTube stream, and I hit to come in
Bring out,
here,
yeah.
and then I got distracted in my messages for 10 minutes, and so I don't know what you guys are talking about right now. So continue on, and I'll catch up.
It's
Fair.
mostly kind of presuppositionalism and the God hypothesis, essentially. But go on, James. What we did? You'll catch up, Bree. You'll catch up. I'm sure.
Mhm.
So yeah, so even if the fringe minority of historians happen to be correct, that their religion, which coincidentally matches their historical findings,
Mhm.
happens to be correct, and everything in Bibles are proven or verified or whatever, and the leaders in the consensus just happen to be wrong about that. The very fact that I'm a layman and that those aren't my fields, and that there's not enough time in one lifetime to study everything that they know, to make my own conclusion. The same thing with science. Not enough time in my lifetime to study
Right.
everything that they
Right.
know. I'm going to have to rely on their wheelhouse and their expertise. It is reasonable for me to conclude or to give merit or to give the greater preponderance of merit to the position or the claim amongst leaders and amongst the consensus that Bibles get a lot wrong. In fact, more than they get right. Right? Not trivial stuff either. Big stuff.
Sure.
Um, so even if
Cosmology
they're
stuff.
yeah, even if
Geology. Name the field. Yeah.
right. Right,
Yeah.
historians, physical sciences, and in the way that they technically are historians as well, like geologists.
Sure.
Um,
Sure.
so the sciences, the way they overlap, even if the leaders in the consensus happen to be wrong, the fringe unemployables, as I call them, happen to be right, and Bibles are like super super verified. I'm fully justified to give the preponderance, to recognize the preponderance of testimony, of credible testimony that says Bibles get it wrong. So even if Bibles get it right, that means that a God, if one were to exist, whatever the hell that is, some super being with an opinion, would be wrong, would be unjust to criminalize my lack of belief when my lack of belief is based on a preponderance of evidence that contradicts his narrative. Right? That's not my fault. It would in this hypothetical universe that Christians propose, it's his job, literally baked into his job description, even according to them, it's his job to make sure that if he wants me to glean an opinion or a conclusion based on the physical evidences available to us and based on the logic that we're capable of using our brain for, if he wants us to use those things to draw a conclusion about whether or not he exists and what we're supposed to do with our life, it's his job to make sure that the correct conclusions are inevitable for any reasonable person, as baked into what scientists and other historians are guaranteed to find. It's his
Well, see,
job to make sure that the
you,
evidence is there for them to find and then relate to me.
you've tripped over the word just again. If your idea of just is what God decides to be just, if just flows from what God wants to be just, then that is entirely just. That's the problem. But as you pointed out earlier, that gives rise to a very Machiavellian kind of God who could think anything is just, could think that slaughtering an entire world is just kind of thing, which it apparently did do. So, it all comes down to how you're using that word.
Right.
And
So
sort
I'm
of
using the I'm go ahead.
the argument is made that, well, you don't decide what justice is because God decides what justice is. Just playing the devil's advocate. That's the argument that I
Sure,
get
I
a lot of
yeah,
time.
that's what they would push back with for sure. So when I'm using the word just, I am not proposing a standard of justice. I am proposing a baseline descriptor of justice in that things are equal. Because this is why we use the scales to represent the idea. So if I'm judged by a different standard than the next human is, then that's not just. Even if the standard that they are judged by is just, judging me by a different standard is automatically unjust. That's what I mean by it.
Well, I think the standard is there, but the standard is whether you believe on flimsy evidence or not. Seems to be
Well,
the
sure.
standard.
But nobody's given the same amount of evidence or the same strength of evidence. So according to their worldview, Paul
Yeah,
was given
yeah,
the most evidence anybody ever was, right?
right.
And everybody that allegedly saw Jesus do miracles and die and and walk around later after they knew for sure he was dead, well,
Yeah.
they get all this proof, right? In fact, doubting Thomas says, "I won't even believe unless you let me finger your holes," and I don't even want to go down that rabbit hole. Um,
Well, see,
but
I don't like that story because they made him close his eyes first. Why does he have to close his eyes? Like that
I know,
was so
right?
weird. Yeah, I don't like that story. It's like, no, Thomas should have said, no, I keep my eyes open or else no deal. What's
Because
the
every
idea?
time before that he had felt inside Jesus had been dark.
Right. Gotta keep the mood going.
Wow. Wow.
Sorry,
Well,
that was
you're basically saying
Related to
Jesus likes it
that
with the
was
lights off,
dirty.
essentially. Yeah,
he
it
likes
was
it with the
very dirty.
lights off. And it's
Yeah.
interesting because Jesus had earlier in his life, according to the stories, said that only wicked people ask for evidence, right? That the faithful walk without it, right? They don't require miracles, they don't require demonstrations of
How
power,
convenient.
right?
Mm.
But at the same time, doubting Thomas asks Jesus to violate his own standards by saying, "I'm not even going to believe you unless you give me this particular specific miracle I'm insisting on." And instead of Jesus saying, "I just already preached against that. I already said only wicked people ask for that kind of evidence." Instead of that, Jesus violates his own ethical standards and says, "Sure, I'll let you feel around in my holes, right, as proof." And so, if we assume that it happened, now doubting Thomas is given evidence as to convince him, right, that we don't get. So even if the standards of saying, okay, you believe in me, you go to heaven, you don't believe in me, then you don't go to heaven, even if we
Mm.
pretend that that makes sense as a just standard of judgment, I'm not given the same opportunities of evidence that Thomas was given or that Paul had forced into his brain against his will. Where's the justice in that?
I,
Now,
I, I
if we just
don't.
say, well,
Yeah, but I don't see justice as everybody has to have the same standard of evidence or the same amount of evidence kind of thing. I mean, some person can be convicted of very little evidence, and another person can be convicted of a huge amount of evidence. It doesn't. I don't. Again, you're sort of running into what the definition of justice is. If you just
well,
define justice as what our understanding of it. Sure, I do agree with you. I absolutely do that we all ought to receive the same level of test, or this, it would be like somebody sitting down to do the same test, and one person has got you know uh, uh, advanced calculus, and the other person has got 1 + 1 =, and then a question mark. You know what I mean? Like, that's not
Hmm.
really what we'd consider to be just or fair, kind of thing. um
All right, so okay.
but if your idea of justice is that God decides how much evidence you get, and that's your personal test, because I think fairness and justice are two different things. Like, for everyone to get the same test, that would be fair. But if somebody is, an absolute, has learning difficulties and kind of thing, and another
Right.
person is,
So
highly advanced, it may be just to give them those tests. So we've got to delineate what's fair and what's just. And if you're
sure. So
defining just as God decides who gets what, then, that's justice, apparently.
yeah, it's an arbitrary justice. It's a conveniently arbitrary religious idea
Sure.
that
Yeah, no,
that
I
isn't
totally
based on
agree.
anything.
Oh,
So,
I totally agree. Yeah.
yeah, but what you're proposing is the idea of the fence that the kids want to see over, and you've got three different size boxes, and if you give them each the same box, the shortest kid's not going to be able to see over it because he's shorter. So you got to give him a taller box
You're
in order
talk
for them.
you're
Go
talking about
ahead.
equity.
That's
Yeah.
equity. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
right, right, right. So I understand. Yeah, fair, fair, completely. But um, so here we've had this proposition that we were designed, the way our brains work was designed by this alleged super being, and he designed our brains to work in such a way where all of our available concepts of justice are completely alien to whatever he means when he says justice. And yet we're expected to pretend as if we can understand whatever system of justice he's using, and then base our life around the thing that we don't understand. That's not reasonable. What would be reasonable is that there's a thing that this alleged created being wants us to utilize in our thought processes, in our, how we decide to approach life and live life, and the way that we work things out, figure things out, and our moral conclusions and stuff. If he has an opinion going into the whole project about what he wants us to think, and he plans to judge us for that, then it's his job, baked into the job description, baked into the narrative. It's his job to make sure that everybody can understand everything they need to understand to be equipped to work within that system. And it
Well, it
did
Everybody
that.
needs to
depends
know
who
the
you
rules to the game to play.
Well, it depends who you talk to, James. Because if you talk to a Calvinist, right, and I don't know if you've had many conversations with Calvinists, they'll sort of say, "Well,
Sure.
God determines who's saved and who's not," and it's just tough,
Right at
tough
birth.
tits.
Right.
Yeah, it's just tough cookies for the people that aren't saved. Like, God just decides, "Hey, you're fucked. Like, that's it. I don't care about you." And it sort of describes a monster as a god, but they've kind of on a bit firmer footing when it comes to unequal distribution of evidence. Because then they can say, hey, well, God just decided I would be saved, and God decided you're going to be tortured, and that's it. And
Sure.
that's their idea of justice and fairness, is just, well, God just decides. Which
Sure.
I don't see as fair or just, but I've got to remind myself that justice is different for different people. It's purely a subjective thing. you know
Hmm.
um a person may think justice is somebody who commits a heinous crime being, condemned to death, and I can see their perspective, but I'm against the death penalty, so I wouldn't see that as justice. Because I see justice as a way to, for a social society to, um, to remediate the ills done to it, to allow its citizens to, sort of come to terms with an injustice being done, sort of that sense of reciprocity being, um, alleviated, that some person has done something that is against the social norm, and a reparation has to happen to balance the scales, if you will. Um,
Sure.
so I think different people have ideas of what justice is, and I mean I got to acknowledge Leo because he had a better question. The question is, well, if God wants you to believe, right? And this is where it falls down against Calvinism, because they're like, well, God doesn't want you to believe because he doesn't want to save you, and it's like, wow, okay, sure. I mean, you can believe that, sure. But if God wants you to believe, um, and he hasn't gotten you to believe, James, doesn't that mean he's failed in what he has wanted to do?
Right. Yeah, it certainly does mean that. And there's a bigger problem in
Right.
that. I never hear atheists talk about this, so I want to talk about
Okay, good.
it. When we talk about the God proposition, uh, convincing us that he exists, it stepping aside the fact that it makes no sense that he cares if we know he did a thing or is a thing or whatever. How's that morally relevant to anything? Stepping aside from that, because it's a different discussion than the one I want
Okay.
to have for a moment.
Okay.
Um, it's multifaceted in the question. We treat the question like it's a specific question, but it's not. It's many questions baked into one, and that doesn't get treated properly. So, if a being that exists literally wants me to know it exists, then all it has to do is show up. When I walk out this door, according to Christian fundamentalists, in fact, even with you two, I owe you both an apology because I caused you to helplessly believe I exist, and in doing so, I have violated your free will. I mean, you had no choice
Um,
but to believe I
actually,
exist.
I'm gonna need reparations, I think.
Wow.
Yes, you
The
are.
Mm.
apology just doesn't stack up. I'm sorry.
There
We
you
have to
go.
talk about
And you can be a
I'll just have
member
you
of
order me some DoorDash.
And give her reparations for
I
convincing
owe
people.
reparations.
Convinced, yeah, yeah.
I've been
I
abandoned.
was
Anyway, just
literally convinced that James Apperson was a person. I don't.
yeah.
How am I even supposed to recover from this? I just like
I
my
know.
whole worldview is just
Right.
Mark.
Well,
Get me
so
through this.
yeah. Okay, so it doesn't violate free will, and we know this from at least the Christian perspective, because um, Jesus made an appearance to Paul on the road to Damascus, like you were talking about earlier, the Damascus Road
Hmm.
experience kind of thing.
Sure.
And this God has made certain appearances to others, if not in his sort of true form, at least in a form that they could recognize that that is a God. Um, so that obviously doesn't violate free will. And you can also point out that the Satan, the devil, knows 100% that God exists, right? And it doesn't
Hmm.
violate his free will to rebel or follow God at all.
Right. I agree. 100%. I agree.
So that whole idea that God cannot appear without violating free will, I think, as far as Christianity goes, there's definitely some problems there with all of the people that have had these different experiences in the text with this entity.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I agree with you 100%. So we've moved past mocking the concept to pointing out that the concept is why the concept is mockworthy. And yeah, I'm still 100% with you on that. So if a super being, regardless of how fantastic its powers were or whatever, wanted me to know it exists, all it has to do is show up. And if it wants me to like it, all it has to do is behave well. And if it wants me to know a thing about it, and these are separate
Mm,
questions, these are separate issues. If it wants me to also know specific things, then it has to demonstrate the things, right? And here comes the real big problem when it comes to that, because if the essential elements of what it means to be a god and not just a super being is the omni qualities, has
sure.
always existed, is everywhere at once, literally knows everything, has eternal, like, limitless power, blah 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 blah, all the omnis, these are not demonstratable. You cannot, if you're a being who has always existed, you cannot demonstrate to a finite being, a being that began to exist at some point, that you've always existed. You can't do it. It's not demonstratable. And if these are one of the essential qualities of what it means to define a god, then it's the then a god has created a burrito too hot for him to eat. He's made a boulder too heavy for him to lift because he's set things in motion to where he has a certain burden upon himself, an obligation that he's created for himself that he can't meet. Because if the definitions of a god that differentiate this from just a very powerful being are the omni-qualities, and the omni-qualities are the only damn things that he can't demonstrate, there's the boulder to lift that he made himself, that he's responsible for, that's too heavy for him to lift. He cannot meet his own burden. And so if he just wants to convince us that he as an entity exists, you walk in the damn door, like in Bruce Almighty, or if you want to go back even further, George Burns. And I'm dating myself to even admit that I've seen that movie with John Denver and George Burns.
That's Dear God, right?
Yeah, there you go.
Oh yeah.
All you had to do, right? Go ahead.
Well, and I think so. Sorry, Bree, go ahead.
Oh, nothing. I was just gonna say, I guess you're not that old compared to everybody on the panel. If we all remember the movie, James.
Fair. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
I don't remember the movie. I don't know what that movie is.
Oh, okay. Well, scratch that. But we're Americans
So
too.
God shows up
it might be an American
as George Burns. God shows up as George Burns at the end.
That's it. That's the whole.
And he's a real nice guy and admits that he makes mistakes sometimes. Like what was it, Peach Pits or something? They're too damn big. Sorry about that. Like, he's just a down to earth guy and he's really nice. Says some wise sounding things and leaves. Yay, God was proven. And that's all he has to do.
I think that
he can come down and do it though. He should do it if he can.
Well, he obviously can.
Do it, yeah.
He obviously can. He has the power to. I think that the main thrust of the Christian argument is that he doesn't want to, but the problem is that he wants us to know that he exists. Like, it seems like the perfect solution if he wants us to know that he exists, and he has the power to do so, which of course he does, then there isn't really a good reason not to. And I think the more... Sorry, Bree.
Have you looked at the tree? Have you looked at the trees?
I have looked at the trees many times. In fact, I did once or twice today, just today, and I didn't see a god there. Yeah. I've looked at.
But that's what it comes down to with the bottom line. They're just like, God does show you, right? That's what they'll say. God does show you.
Right. He has all of these markers or signs. Yeah. However, the problem is that those signs don't necessarily lead to a god. There's nothing.
Well, and every time we investigate them, they have different reasons behind them than God, right? Every time we look into something that's, oh, look at this. This is proof of God, of God's majesty. And there's always, every time we go dig in and start to investigate, start to overturn the reasons or the origins for things, it's never that.
Right. Well, this is why
that's sort of along the lines of what I was going to say. When we look for things that are falsifiable about God, that we start to find them. So you could say, hey, if an omni-God that you're talking about is omnipotent, omnibenevolent, and omniscient, then why does the problem of evil exist, kind of thing? And we start to, if there is evil in the world, an omnibenevolent God wouldn't put up with it. There's all these natural evils. We start to find falsifiable things.
Evils, though.
You don't believe in evils?
So good. You're a moral anti-realist.
I think you all are like anthropocentrist, like most people are, and I'm just not. So I don't look at things from like a human point of view. I come at arguments as a organism on Earth.
Okay.
Bottom line, yeah.
Well, yeah. No,
that's anthropocentric, like human morality and stuff like that, I scoff at. I can't even fathom how people are arguing about it. Like, humans are so self-important about this kind of stuff.
Well, I have to, because I'm a human. So the way that I ground my morality is in the sort of like the fact that I'm a human, and I acknowledge that the framework for my morality is entirely subjective. Like, it's entirely like what I think. So it's only in virtue to that subjective framework of what is for the best well-being for humans and human
Yeah.
society. You know, and I completely concede there is nothing in the universe to say that that's the best thing. Like if you go
Right.
outside
And I
that
just
framework, my good and evil means nothing, you know.
and just to correlate, my position is that I just extend that same thing except for to all organisms and life on Earth, right? That's my
Right.
position. Okay.
But you'll
So, I
still
mean,
eat salad. You know, obviously that's not the
yeah,
best for the lettuce.
yeah. Well, is it
So
not the best or is it the best? I don't know. I don't know lettuce that well, so
Uh
some plants
let us
benefit from
consider it.
eating and carrying their seeds and propagating their species. Some organisms benefit from that, right?
maybe we're in a symbiotic relationship with lettuce. I don't know.
Yeah,
I
the
I
way to
mean,
deal with Caesar.
well, this is the thing. Ants farm aphids, and they're sort of seen as a symbiotic relationship kind of
Mhm.
thing. So why does that symbiotic relationship not apply to cattle and lettuce
It,
and
it
all of
it
these things?
does. Yeah, domestication is the word we use. That's another anthropocentric thing. It's just it's symbiosis
Right,
with humans. We have special words for and like when oh you will say like a lion can't kill or a lion can't commit murder or whatever because only humans can commit murder because
right, right.
it's just killing a member of your own species with with indifference or whatever, right? Whatever
Yeah.
the situation is.
Well,
So
morality
we have our
itself is
own.
only applied to humans. Like you can't. There's no morality for orangutans or something. It's just
Well,
human
I'd
morality.
imagine they have their own morality. We just don't
Uh,
understand it.
It's kind of a proto morality. I don't think it raises to the level of humans because they
Oh,
don't have no actual
interesting.
structure to it.
I think we found something me and Mark might be able to debate on. Finally,
Okay.
Finally.
I think that multiple species have morality, and yeah, and I think I can back it up with data. So not tonight, but
No, I
like at some
mean,
point,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
me and you can talk about
I
it. It
think
seems
they
like
have like
it's hard
the
to find stuff that we get to argue about, right?
right, right, right. I think they have the core sort of emotions down and sort of a core system. Like the Cachapan monkeys are fascinating because they have sort of if one of them lies about a snake being there, and in order to steal food, they will punish that monkey kind of thing. So you can sort of see the elements in it. I don't think it rises to the level of a codified system of
Oh, I wouldn't
of
even start with. I would move right away from primates, and we'll start with like delphinids, probably orcas. When we
orcas.
start talking about it, yeah, when we start talking about animal morality and stuff, yeah, that's where we're gonna. If we have that discussion, you and me, we'll have. That's where I will
Okay.
start. So I don't
Sure.
want to derail this conversation because this is
No,
about
no, no, no. I
James's
gotcha.
interaction. So who were you interacting with? I like I said, I just kind of caught the tail end of this, and I just got off work
Derek
when you guys
from Myth
started.
Vision.
Okay, so you were on Myth Vision.
No, he was
no,
doing something on Testify's stream, I think.
Mm.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Inspiring philosophy on and Testify, and Derek
Hmm.
Oh,
went onto their stream.
Michael. Yeah, I know him.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I saw somebody mentioning him in the side chat, Michael. So did you get to engage with him directly?
Derek,
Derek
Derek
did.
engaged
Okay.
with them, and then he came in here for a little while, but then he had to go. He's
Okay.
got
So Derek,
work to
this
do.
was
He's
thing for Derek, not for James. I thought you were the one that engaged with him. Sorry, James. I thought that was
oh
the
no, I don't. I'm nobody too, and even when I
Just
comment
silly
That's
on
to me,
not
sweetie.
true,
to
James.
them, I'm nobody. They avoid engaging with me in any kind of like hooked in sort of way. Like if I comment on one of their shorts, their short videos, they'll respond. But then when they respond, they say things like, "Well, you should go check this out or that out." But then I'll ask them, "Wait, are you specifically asking me to go review this material for you and give you a response?" And they'll silence ever after. They don't want to give me the opportunity to say I've specifically engaged with them on a topic and they're waiting for me to respond on a thing because they don't want me to be a guy that's qualified to step into the ring with them. They don't want to give me billing. They don't want to give me like let me into that ring. And I don't blame them. Like, I know how the game is played, right? And I'm not trying to manipulate them. But Derek's got this big old show, made himself relevant through a certain level of success, and made himself relevant by being a thorn on their side and something that they can't afford to ignore because the religion is hemorrhaging even more members because of the education that Derek imparts. So they've got to try to, go at the source of the problem for them, which is Derek in this case. So he's made himself relevant. If I really want to make myself relevant, I just got to get organized and build a real channel. I just haven't done it. So I'm not complaining or anything. But no, there's just no way they'd ever let me on their channel until I become a
Well, it's
problem for
their
them.
loss, James. It's their loss, honestly.
I think you'd be excellent engagement over there.
Yeah.
I saw Michael on he was on Atheist Junior's channel a couple weeks ago, right? Inspiring Philosophy. So I know Atheist
Absolutely.
Junior's bigger than any of us, but
Yeah.
he's
Yeah, AJ's
not
really cool. I like AJ.
yeah. And I like AJ, definitely. But as far as inspiring philosophy, though, I wouldn't put it past him to come on a smaller channel and engage with you directly.
I mean, I could try to leverage myself into that spot. I just haven't cared enough, I guess.
Okay, yeah, and they're not
Yeah.
trying to pressure you into it or
No,
anything.
don't feel pressured.
Yeah, I'd be open to it. Like if he
I
stopped
think
in right now and said, "Hey, let me in," I'd let him in and talk about whatever he wanted to talk about. But
what I'm saying is I think you'd be a good interlocutor for inspiring philosophy. Not that you wouldn't, Mark. Just I think James would. Yeah.
well, everybody knows Mark.
Until you said it. Thank you.
Mark,
I'm
right?
gonna blush.
So. Yeah, I mean,
I do my
I
best.
like
I just enjoy these conversations. I really do, and I do like talking to theists. I find them curious. Definitely very interesting. Yeah.
I love Mark's ability to play devil's advocate and to give pushback where he sees potential weaknesses or flaws or uncovered.
Oh, look, it's in my nature. Like I remember somebody once asked me like what's the best like I'm playing video games and they're like what's the best weapon, and I'm like this one or this one, and I said, oh well, this one's got all this stuff but this one has all this stuff, but both of them do these things well, but neither of them. And he goes, Mark, you just argued for one then the other then both then neither. And I think that totally sums me up basically. You know what I mean? Like yeah, and I thought, man, that is so like me. And somebody once asked, does my wife win any arguments against me? Absolutely. She just presents two sides and lets me exhaust myself arguing with myself, and then just steps in to tell me what she wants. That's how she wins arguments. She just presents two sides.
You have to no dichotomies in the Reid house. He's got to break them all down.
Right.
Choices.
Right, choices. Yeah, and then I have problem choosing between choices because I sit there and overanalyze. But that's the fun of having my brain. That's the fun of
beach or the mountains, Mark. Pick the beach or the mountains.
The what? The what and the what?
The beach or the mountains.
Oh, I'd probably have to go for beach. I think that I'd go for beach. Probably only because we don't have mountains here. Like no joke, no mountains in my state.
Yeah,
it's so old and eroded.
On the other side of the continent, aren't they?
Yep.
They're kind of small. I don't know if we'd call those mountains up here, but
yeah. No, I know you've got some impressive. I would like to go to Colorado and see mountains, though. That would be cool.
Yeah,
yeah.
Colorado's probably the Colorado, Wyoming, that area. Yeah. The best mountains I've seen were actually in Utah, but I haven't seen all of Colorado. And I understand they have allegedly the best mountains, but Utah had some gorgeous landscape. If you ever get a chance to go through Utah, go through.
If I go to America, I'd love to go to places like that. Like Colorado and places. I'm really not interested in like New York, Las Vegas, and stuff like that. It just doesn't interest me.
See the scenery, not the cities, right? Well, I mean, I guess I'm not going to shame people for seeing the cities, but like if I went to Australia, even I wouldn't like want to go to Sydney. I'd be more likely to go to some place with no name at all and spend my time romping around in the middle of nowhere.
Well, that's what I did when I went to England, like see all the woods and stuff like that. It was actually
Hmm.
gorgeous, see the moors and
Oh,
things. It's great.
see a lot of. I mean, when it comes to Europe, any place, if I were to go any place in Europe, though, I would see I would want to see monoliths and things like that too. I would want to see old abandoned architecture, especially the UK, old Roman forts and things like that. Just fascinate me.
Well, they have some amazing architecture in Bath in England. It's just
Hmm.
amazing, and sort of all of the sort of irrigation aqueducting that they did in the Roman times is just awesome, absolutely awesome. Highly recommend. We've totally shifted the conversation. It's now
Yeah,
it's now James Apperson's travel destinations kind of
yeah.
thing.
Where
Yeah,
you
we're
where
now
you
the
headed, James?
travel agency.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where else could we look for Jesus?
Mm.
He's got to be around here somewhere.
Right.
Did somebody check inside that volcano in Antarctica? Just to be
Right.
sure.
Yeah, just to be
I'm
sure.
waiting for the conspiracy theories about that to come out, right? Like the volcano in Antarctica.
Well, I follow a channel on one of my I call it my toxic sock channel, but a channel that does that follows earthquakes and stuff, and they were talking about the earthquake and the earthquakes from the volcano or whatever, and that it was signs of the end time. It was
Right.
quite a shift. Everywhere I look now, everybody's predicting the end times.
Oh,
But
Uh,
the end times
they
has been predicted so often throughout like history. It's they got to
uh,
get tired of it sooner or later, surely.
well, don't you realize though that we're living in the new Babylon right now, right? This is the new Babylon.
New
The
Babylon.
whole
Explain that to me.
yeah,
Bumble Breed,
because
explain.
Babylon is everything that's against Jesus, right? Just
yeah.
because Old Testament, anything that's
Okay.
so as our society and culture moves away from Christ and from
Mm,
His light, we start
hmm
to um, dive into depravity and start to accept things like interracial marriage and like transgender people.
Ooh, how dare we?
Yeah.
Look, there's
Yeah.
nothing to suggest that our society is getting worse. Like, by every metric, our society is getting.
Mark, it feels like it's getting worse, doesn't it? Just as a feel. Don't worry about metrics. Just how you feel about it.
No, it
That
doesn't
this is the
feel
worst
that
time. That
way.
this is the worst time in history to ever be alive. You don't feel. I've actually had
No,
an argument
no.
used against me. You were there, weren't you? Who was that guy on Math Pig's channel?
Was
He's
I
like, but
there?
don't you? I thought you were there. He's like, but don't you realize, or don't you agree that this is the worst time in history to be alive? The world's like society's falling apart. I'm like, no, this is the best time to be alive
Right.
ever. It's now every day that we live is that day is a better day to have been alive than the day
Yeah.
before it because new advancements in
Mm-hmm.
uh, technology and in healthcare, things that'll help improve human lives every day. It's happening. Obviously, there's things that are bad that are happening too, like climate change and stuff like that. But up until the end, it's going to be as long as we're continuing to
Yeah.
have scientific, cultural, and societal advances. It's going to be the best. Each consecutive day is going to be better than the last.
Yeah, but it depends on who you ask. I mean, because if you just listen to the Archie Bunker theme song, you'll hear arguments for why the best times were in the 50s. It just depends on
Yeah,
who you
Yeah.
ask.
But people
think of neighbors like the
romanticize the past,
Jeffersons.
I think. I think they really do
Sure, they do.
romanticize it. It depends for who. I mean, if you were a king in the medieval times, you were probably living large. I'm not so sure it was that great for the peasantry. So, it depends on where on the social strata that you want to place yourself. Um, yeah. But I think overall, for human well-being and human happiness and everything, today
Just
is the
over.
best
That's
day.
what I meant too.
Yeah.
Overall, for
Yeah,
individuals,
absolutely.
even
Absolutely.
individual groups, it's not the best time right now. But overall, for
Hmm.
all of humanity as a conglomerate, yeah. Again,
Absolutely.
from an anthropocentric point of view,
Anthropocene. Yeah, I'm not so sure that the polar bears would necessarily
yeah,
agree with us there,
not
but
the
And the
yeah.
whales wouldn't either.
All the rest of life, probably, I would say, up until the end of, well, I would give them until, yeah, the end of the Younger Dryas, probably, and then humans came barreling in and
And there
killed
goes the neighborhood.
yeah, ruined the fun for everybody else.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
But
I've got a lot of optimism for the future. To be honest with you, I've got a great deal of optimism. I think that um, with this push towards the moon, it's so exciting. Like, it's so exciting that we're actually, doing another moon mission, and that we're going to use that as a launch pad to Mars. It's all very exciting. I might be a naive boy for thinking that, but I think that that stepping stone off the planet is so exciting. It's just incredible. And I don't
you ready
like.
ready for humanity to leave this planet? Is that what you're saying?
I
What if we
mean,
find God out there?
maybe, who knows? It'd be great if we did. Like, that'd be nice, but he hasn't made an appearance so far, and he probably could have, so I don't see any reason why we would. As James pointed out, we're probably going to, find out it's entirely within the natural world, even if we do find something.
Well,
Um,
what'll happen? We'll land on God's planet, and he'll look at it like, "Fuck,
yeah. I put
they're
him on that
here.
planet for a reason. Oh.
How the hell did you guys get here?"
Oh, watch out! Richard Madsen will turn up and say, "Told you so." Like, that'd be the worst.
Oh,
Richard
yeah.
Madsen.
Oh God,
Uh,
Richard.
if Richard Madsen turns out to be right, I'm going to be unhappy. But good on him. I love Richard; he's awesome. But if he turns out to be right, I'm going to be very unhappy.
I've told him that. I said, if Christianity turns out to be true, I hope it's Madsenism. It's the
Right, right,
Madsenism
right.
version of Christianity, because I can, sure, space farms, whatever. That's fine.
Sure, sure.
That
I,
it's still
I
not. It
like
sounds natural to
science.
me.
I like science fiction, so that's
Yeah.
perfectly fine. Um, sorry, Richard. Yeah, but no, I think so. Having an argument with somebody who was sort of saying, "Well, why do anything if you're human and like the universe is going to end in heat death kind of thing?" And I'm like, you don't know that we can't find a way to leave this universe. I mean, we're talking how many years in the future? Not trillions, not quadrillions, not even. Look how far we've come in like barely 200 years of industrialization kind of thing, and then you want to project that to, oh well, you're necessarily going to die in this universe at heat death. How can you possibly know that for sure? It's so far ahead of time. I think the entire point of humanity is to try anyway. We don't know if we're going to make it. We don't know if we're going to survive. The whole point is to try as hard as humanly possible and see if we do. That's been the history of humans up to this point.
I got a question about that with the heat death, right? So we're talking
Yeah,
how many billions of years in the future is that
not even
projected to be?
billions. It's like 10 to the power of like 1 times 10 to the power of 48 or something like that. Like, it's just
Could
like
you? I
so
mean, so
far.
put that in perspective of how many orders of magnitude longer the human species would have to last than any other species that has ever been around in order for a human to see the heat death of the universe. I don't think that that's possible to happen. I think speciation is too. There's no way that we can even move a couple million years into the future without speciation happening. That's my opinion.
So it's 1.7 times 10 to the power of 106 years, which is just,
Jesus.
yeah, that is so far into the future. It's almost inconceivable. It's like, that is so
Yeah,
that's
and
like,
I mean, you're talking even that like 10 to the power or whatever to when the sun swallows the earth after that the heat death
right,
is
right.
too.
That's
So
the first problem. But
yeah,
he's not going to say, "Oh, well, the sun will swallow the earth," because that's so far in the future that we're likely to have. If we survive, it's likely we will have left the solar system by then. So that doesn't work. But he's trying to make the argument that heat death will end us. And my point is, you cannot necessarily claim to know that for sure. That's impossible to know. Um, I guess in that way I'm a fleeting optimist, and I do acknowledge that basically evolution happens, and that if we survive, then great. If we don't, then that's evolution at play. That's what happens. The we try as hard as possible to survive. If we don't survive, it's okay. Life will go on. That's okay.
An
Yeah,
edible straw, isn't that wild?
that's
Never had one
awesome.
before.
That is awesome. You know
Mm-hmm.
what? I'd
It's from a
probably
smoothie place here in
I
town.
can see it as being dangerous. I'd probably start to eat it before I finished with it. You know what I mean? Like this the
Well, the top inch of it kind of just dissolved and broke off in my mouth a second ago. So that's why I was like, the people are going to think I'm sitting here eating my straw. And I'm like, no, it's candy.
you heard it first. Things dissolve in Bree's mouth. You heard it first.
Melts in your mouth, not in your
Melts
hand.
in your mouth.
You know, start talking about this argument I heard about slavery. That's the kind of your argument reminded me of it. That's why I'm saying this. That was like, oh, if there was no slavery, then we wouldn't be where we are now, and the people who exist today wouldn't exist. So slavery is a good thing because we exist. It's like, no, it's not, because the people who exist now had suffered where they
Right,
needn't
right.
suffer.
And
Sure.
sort of if you're taking a sort of a society wide or a species wide view like that, you've got no way to know if it would have been better. It's like those arguments you hear that slavery was good for African people because it brought them up to, you know, sort of a technological level. It's like you don't know how they would. You've got no counterfactuals at all to say how the development of those people would have gone without it. So
Yeah.
you
Or
can't
maybe we took
say
all the best people from their nations when we were enslaving them. You don't know.
right. Yeah, you
I took their
don't.
scientists and their researchers. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Right. So no. There's just no way to know without colonialization how the world would have turned out. You have zero counterfactuals for it. It might have been a worse world. It might have been a better world. You just don't know. You cannot predict that at all. I
Like
reject that
True.
argument.
butterfly effect stuff type level of ideology there. There's too many variables for you to
Right.
make any kind of prediction about what the world would have been like
Right.
had this happened, had that not happened.
I
But
agree. Good.
but we do need to acknowledge that that there are things that happen that looking back ought not have happened, right?
Right.
That, you know, slavery was being one of those, the Holocaust, for instance, things like
Yeah.
that.
Christianity.
Well,
Should
you
say.
can make an argument that it may have been like, because you don't know the outcomes of causalities, you don't know how they came out. It may have been a better world if slavery did happen or did not happen, but you can't tell. All we can do is do the best things for now, and based upon our very limited understanding of what leads to one thing after another, because that is the most reliable way we have for good outcomes, is to use induction and that predicting power of patterns to be able to predict outcomes. That's all we can do. We certainly
Right.
can't, you know, sort of tell the future, so we've got no way to know.
Right. Yeah, I don't know what the world would look like if Christianity hadn't happened. But if I had a time machine, I'd be willing to find out. I'm just saying.
I think probably some other religion would rise and be in its place, kind of thing.
Sure. But
So
again, good.
do you think that like it would have been monotheistic though, or do you think they would have kept going with because there was a lot of before Christianity, a lot of the places were polytheistic that like, I mean, I'm thinking about Greece and
Yeah,
Macedonia and
Rome
yeah.
and yeah.
Yeah.
I
Do you think they would have
maybe we'd all be complaining about, you know, Jupiter kind of thing. Maybe.
yeah. Mithraism?
Yeah, Mithraism. Actually, that was the main contender, wasn't it? So maybe we'd be sitting here
Mhm.
bitching about the people that believe in Mithra.
Yeah, like fucking Mithra. Good God.
Fucking Mithrans. Always
Oh,
shoving
you a
Mithra
Mithra
down our throat. Yeah.
Mithracist?
Yeah, I also have a problem with Mothra. Yeah, you motherfuckers need Godzilla.
Mothra.
That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
Those young Earth
what is-
Mithricists, I hate them. Yeah.
was there a book to Mithraism? Mithraism?
Very little of it was known, wasn't it? Like there wasn't really.
There,
I don't think so.
I don't think they had their. I know there was like influence from Zoroastrianism and things like
Yeah.
that, but
So, Kata, we'll see you when you get back. Hopefully, if we're still here, and yeah, definitely have fun. Be safe. Real quick, somebody asked in the chat where we're at. So I'm currently in Indiana, which is nothing but cornfields and old
Good
cities.
times.
So
Woo!
yeah, I can't stand Indiana, and I hate that I got stuck here. I can't wait to move. Don't know where I want to move to. It'll
and
be somewhere.
continuing with James for the most boring state to live in. I am in Chicago.
Oh, all right.
Chicago, Illinois, but I'm not even near. I meant to say I'm on the opposite side of Illinois from Chicago, so
Gotcha.
that is just like Indiana. The whole rest of the state is, so it's all the same here.
Right.
And
Fair,
I am
fair.
in Western Australia, which sounds exciting, but really is not.
Oh, all right. So Kata and Dank are in eastern Australia on a mountainside somewhere.
So where are you really, Mark? I mean, we know.
Oh, the NASA studio, of course.
Australia, right?
Where else would I be but the NASA studios for convincing everybody that Australians exist?
Yes.
I mean, who could think this bloody accent is real? I mean, seriously, I can't believe you all bought it. It's ridiculous.
See, if Mark lets go of that pen he has in his hand, it'll shoot straight up.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Yeah, to make it whoa! Did you see it?
Wow.
There it was.
CG,
Board,
CGI. It's all CGI.
Yeah, CGI.
All right. Well, I might take off. It was really good to talk to you, though. It was really awesome. I really enjoyed it. I'm gonna try and do some actual work or something, because why not?
That's fair. Yeah. Great to have you both.
Yeah, it was really good to see you.
Yeah. I hope we get to talk again soon, Mark.
Yeah, we'll do. And Bree, you're on for that debate.
Yeah, we got to do that morality. It'll be interesting because I don't think I've seen that morality debate before, really, with about animal morality. I don't know if I've seen.
Do animals have morality?
Mm-hmm.
How does it compare to humans?
It's hard to tell. I mean, you can't exactly ask animals about their morality. It's very hard to tell.
Yeah, we'll do it though.
Yeah. Sure. Take care. Love you both. Thank you, audience, for giving me your time. Much appreciated.
Awesome.
And, see ya. Much appreciated.
Awesome.
And see ya.
See you
Bye.
soon.
Oh boy.
Yeah. I like that Mark.
Yeah, that Mark guy. Something else, right?
He's pretty great, I'll admit.
Did you see that video I dropped in the side chat for you?
I didn't click on it yet, but I will.
It's